Hey, Changemaker! Welcome to Rethink Social Change podcast, a show dedicated to helping social change practitioners improve the way they make change happen to achieve tangible and sustained impact. I'm your host, Ratiba Sharif. I've worked with some of the world's leading social change organizations for more than 2 decades on 4 continents to help them design better projects, learn from them, and measure their results. Using Rethink Social Change cards, I will challenge changemakers like yourself to share their experience on what worked, what didn't, and why, in a very unique way. I will shuffle the deck of 54 Rethink Social Change cards and randomly draw 4 cards that will guide our conversation. So if you're ready for unscripted, jargon-free stories from the field, let's dive into today's episode. I invited the dynamic Tarek Lamouchi. He's a trainer, an advisor, he teaches in a university and even writes books. He started his career working in microfinance in Tunisia before extending his expertise to NGOs and the private sector in areas of conflict management, peace building, economic justice, or social responsibility. The diversity of his professional experience gives him this holistic perspective on social change that I can't wait to tap into. In life, he's a dedicated dad and a storyteller who publishes, wait for it, horror and sci-fi books for adults, and more recently, fantasy stories for children and children at heart. I'm buckling up for this one. I know he'll challenge me as much as the cards will challenge him. Let's get him in. Hey, Tarek Lamouchi, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me, Ratiba.
So cool. I'm so looking forward to our conversation. So, you know the rules of the game, right? I will shuffle the rethink cards. I will show you 3 cards and keep 1 bonus card for myself,
Okay.
which I will bring into the conversation later on. So I know that you were just busy with, I guess, trainings, doing a training
Yes.
just before coming. How was that? How did that go?
It was interesting, actually. It was a training on financial education for a group of women who have small businesses in Kibili, in the south
Yeah.
of Tunisia. So that was very interesting to see the dynamic of the economy
Uh-huh.
in the region and the potential of those women. And let's say that, as you know, each training is an opportunity for the trainer himself, themselves, to learn
Mm-hmm.
something new.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what were their businesses in? I'm guessing it's something like artisanat or
A lot of artisanal, a lot of handicrafts, a lot of people working on decoration,
yeah.
agriculture also. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. All right. I've got your cards here and I've got the
Okay.
bonus card here as well. It's
Let's
interesting.
hear.
All right. So you have a change card. So we're talking individual change. All right.
Okay.
So here we're looking at knowledge, attitudes, skills, behaviors of individuals. Then you, these 2 cards go together, but in people, you've got donors. And
Provide
in
funding.
tools, you've got a tool card here. We have provide funding, which is a duplicative word. So these are our cards, I guess. We're going to talk about projects that bring about individual change, that aim for individual change, and the place of donors, how donors provide funding, the mechanisms for funding, the relevance of funding, I guess, etc. So very quick question, like first one, what are the ideas that jump to
Okay.
mind?
Yeah, I'll talk first of all about the individual change actually, and I think that let's say that the main objective of each project is to bring a kind of change for the individuals, for the people that we are working with. It can be a knowledge, skill, or behavior, and in a perfect scenario, it will be the 3 of them actually. And later I talk about how donors or funds have to focus on that, on this micro change that will allow us actually to achieve the macro change. I worked actually on a project on the informal sector, Ratiba, And we had actually different profiles when we talk about individual, and we needed to make change on different profiles of people. We have the people who are working on the private sector, we have the people from the government, from the public institutions, the civil society, and the informal workers themselves. And let me tell you that the most challenging part was working with the informal workers themselves, because they had to learn, they have to have change on three levels: the knowledge, how to formalize their activities, what are the different procedures, the laws, what do they have to do. Then they had to learn how to apply this knowledge. They have to learn also advocacy skills, communication skills. And the most important part was the behavior. They changed the way of thinking of themselves and of their relation with mainly the public institutions and the government, because they were thinking of themselves as people who need to stay in the informal sector. It's safer for them. They don't need the complication with with the government. They consider the government, let's say, as an opponent in a certain way. They didn't see any reason actually to interact with the public institutions, and so it was very difficult to change this mindset. And in order to achieve it, we had a lot of trainings with them, mainly on communication, conflict management, a lot of training on the formalization process. But also we encourage them and we help them to create organization associations, so they have the power to negotiate with the public institutions and with unions also. And that was the transformation I think that we needed to see. Some of those associations succeeded. That they have their they have their own reputation now. They're working in different other projects with other donors. For others it was more difficult, but by the end of the day, we focused on some people, some individual who, let's say, have the leadership of this process. And that was from the part of the from the side of the informal workers. We have to do, let's say, similar work with public institutions, because when we started talking about informal sector at the beginning, for them it was like a threat. It was even for the public sector also. And we have to, let's say, the word that they used is to eliminate them. And it was important to work with them to come up to change this attitude and how to integrate them on the formal sector. It took many years to achieve something. We worked on a law. We advocate for this law, but in all the process, all the steps of the process, we had some champions. The champions, people who believed on the thing, who changed their attitude from the very beginning, and who continued working on this process. So and it's important actually, because in after a few years from our we started the working on this, I think by the end of 2012, I think. But in the next years, we saw a lot of other organizations and donors interested on the issue of the informal sector, but everyone tackled in a different way, and every organization has their own stakeholders that they wanted to work with. For example, the ILO worked on the issue, but mainly with the Ministry of Employment. The GIZ also worked on it, but also with the public institutions and as civil society. Because when I worked on this, I was in the civil society sphere. We were the link between the public institutions, the informal workers, and also the Utica and Connect and ESEO, who are representing the private sector. So it was interesting to see this dynamic, but I think that in the very core of the project, we had to transform some individual to support and to help and to lead all the process to achieve the goals that we achieved.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. Three three points and maybe questions came out of what you said. The first one is that let's stick with individual change, because you said that two things. The first one is, although we do aim for individual change, even for within institutions, there are people. So even the institutional work that you're doing also involves individual change at its core.
Yes.
And then you mentioned that the informal workers got into associations. So that to have more of a voice, to have more strength, to be able to advocate and engage different institutions. Was that targeted? Like, was that one? Was it part of the theory of change? So we'll change their perspective. We'll train them so they gain knowledge on how to be formal, how to formalize their what they offer, their skills, and then and then they'll form associations so to organize better, etc. Or did it come organically?
Yeah, at the beginning, actually, we didn't think about creating associations. The first part of the project, our main focus were to understand the informality in Tunisia. What are the reasons? What are the root causes? And what are the different, let's say, solutions that can be provided and followed? And during this process, actually, it was a multi-stakeholder process. Some of the ideas that came, one of them was to bring those informal workers together, to have the same voice, to advocate for their rights. So it was something that came actually organically during the process. We يعني the first idea was to come up with solutions, but when we found the solution that we can work on, we started actually working on them. And the donor at that time, they decided to have an extension with us, so they renewed the project in order to continue the work on the creation of those association, to reinforce them, and also to work with the public institutions and the private sector and other stakeholders on developing this auto-entrepreneur law that will allow the informal workers to move from the informal sector to the formality.
Formal sector. Okay. And it's interesting because you talked about law, etc. I'm guessing that the champions helped you both work with the informal sector, but also you had champions within institutions, right? More established
Yes.
institutions, be they
Yeah.
public or private. Can you tell me a little bit about these champions? Were they with the cause from the start, or did they gain themselves as they
Yeah.
engaged in the process, change
Yeah.
their perception and their engagement subsequently?
Yeah. So let's say that when we started this mapping from the beginning of the stakeholders, we had like five types of stakeholders, and usually in every issue you will find those five types. We have the active allies, the passive allies, the neutrals, the passive and opponent, and the active opponent. So we have allies who are like already working on the issue, very interested, even before we came to work on it. And we had the passive allies, people who are, let's say that they want actually to support the issue, the cause. But if anyone came and talk to them, they will not do anything. And we have also the neutral, and from the other side, opponent usually people who have their interests on keeping this status quo. So we tried to find who are the potential allies, and also the allies who have, let's say, a kind of influence on the process. And that's why when we started working, for example, with public institutions ministry, we didn't actually work on convincing the ministers themselves, but we worked on the management level, because the ministry can change like in few months. They don't know if they will stay there, but the managers from the different department, they are there. And we
Technocrats.
had a lot of discussions with people to identify who are the most interested ones in the Ministry of Finance, Employment, in other institutions, in other also civil society organizations, and in the private sector. Let's say that from the beginning, lot of people were against the idea of working with the informal sector because they have this misunderstanding. Usually
Mm,
people they have this confusion between informal sector and illegal sector. So when we talk
yes.
about informality, people think about smuggling, about border smuggling. But we talk
Mhm.
about micro entrepreneurs who worked at their homes, who didn't have official registration. It's completely different thing, and we had to work with people to understand this. And after understanding this, we had to give them the responsibility, because it's their responsibility as government and as public institution to think about the solutions and what every institution can provide to support the process. So we saw this transformation or this change in the mindset of the people that we worked with, and like even after the project they continued working on it. They advocated for this law, and they invested a lot on this issue.
Mm. And just a question about the champions. When you did your stakeholder analysis, so the allies, whether they're vocal or not, or passive or active allies, that's a given. That's a quick win. What
Yeah,
about the opponents? Did you try to gain some opponents? Because sometimes opponents actually do have leverage, and they can bring people to a cause, or on the contrary remain obstacles to advancing
yeah,
a project. So how did you engage, or did you engage any opponents, and in what way did you do that?
yeah. Actually, for example, was one of the opponent, and they were opponent not because they have interests, but because they didn't understand very well the issue. Was, for example,
Mm,
the finance people. For them, giving, for example, incentives for people, informal workers to come to formalize. Uh, it's not very fair, because the people who are already on the formal sector, they don't have those
yeah, they didn't get.
incentives.
Yeah.
Yeah, who will
Mm,
collect the money from them. So their opposition were mainly about the process and the understanding of the issue, and it took actually a lot of time to come up with them for a common ground. And even now there is there is
mm.
there are things that
Still resistant.
have to be improved in this situation. Also, we met with
Mm,
people who are working on the informal sector, and they take advantage from it. They gain enough money from it. With these people, it was very difficult. And what we did actually is, for example, in the region like Bengerden, who is a border region with
bordering Libya.
yes, with Libya. So we give them actually the responsibility to create the organization, the association. We select from them the ones who have the willing, and we saw from the meeting that we have with them that they want actually to change things. But in all cases, let's say that in our work with opponents, not all of them change their minds.
Mm,
And if they changed, we had to there was a kind of compromise. We had to
mm.
sacrifice something in
Something.
order to bring them, especially because they have the power and the influence.
Mm, That's super interesting. It's just fascinating how um, the relationship building and how you navigate. This kind of you give and take and bring to you, and the relationship building, rapport building is just fascinating and crucial in these
Yeah,
in this kind of work,
and
regardless of what it
let's
is that you do.
yes, and let me tell you, because we talk about also the donors and
Yes,
the
providing
funding.
funding.
Actually, yes, the challenge with project is that usually we have like a specific period of time, like I don't know, 2 or 3 years project. Uh, and usually, for example, for an issue like the informal sector, we worked like for 8 years. So it was important to engage the donor that they will accept to give other funds for this, to convince them that we need more time, and that not just in 1 or 2 years or 3 years we will achieve our objective. We need more time. So it was interesting that we have this flexibility with the State Department, actually, who was the donor. And I think that's something that donors have to learn. Like, they have to think out of this specific periods from projects, and they have to think about, like, more than 3, 4, 5 years, what we can achieve
Right.
in a long period, and then we split it in different projects, maybe 5 years and then another 5 years. But they have يعني, because that we have always this stress of achieving goals, of having
Results.
results, even if you don't have the time to do it.
Okay. And so, since you're talking about results, it's a process, right? As you've mentioned, it's a lengthy
Yeah.
process. Sometimes you have to, you do one step forward, two step backwards, one to the side, depending on how engaged, and the social context and political context and the economic context of the country, right, at the same time, because that
Yeah.
works in parallel to your project. How do you actually show, because you haven't achieved the result, but you're making progress towards the results? How do you
Yeah.
engage donors in that conversation? How did you do it, for instance, in this project?
Yeah, actually, it was like let me explain that we have a local organization at this time and another international one, and we had also to show successes through our reports, success story of the informal workers, things that we achieved, and also every time recommendation of what can be done. So we had to keep this continuous communication through the international NGO with the donor, and to show that we are moving forward. We didn't achieve the results that we had from the beginning, but we are moving forward to it. And then we had the acceptance to renew the project. But by the end, they changed a little bit the strategy, because at some point the idea was to become more, okay, we help you, we support you all this time. Now it's up to you and the structures and the institution that you work with to continue the effort.
Yeah. And so, did you, in the project documents, in the log frame, in your indicator list, did you have, because I'm assuming for this kind of project is number of informal sector businesses or whatever that have formalized, okay? So that's,
Formalized.
or number of laws, the laws that have been passed, da, 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 da. So those are very tangible. And those are the kind of the North Star, right? This is what you see,
Yeah.
this is what you aim for. But the reality is you have to change perceptions, attitudes. We know you have to have the work towards intent, behavior change intent, right? I want to legalize or formalize my work. Sorry, formalize, not legalize.
Yeah.
So and that takes time, and you can go backwards, right? You can make progress, so much progress. Sometimes, say the informal the worker would say, okay, let me go through this process. I understand that I need to formalize this, and they are confronted to an
Yes.
administrative block. And then they were like, back down. And they were like, no, you didn't, what you told us wasn't true. Da, 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 da. So how do you balance that throughout the
Yeah,
project?
actually, it was a little bit tricky, because, as you said, we trained them on the process. We told them, we tell them everything that they need to know, the different steps. But it's exactly what you said. When they go and start the process, they discover another reality. So we have to work on different levels. We have to work with informal workers to give them the information, but also we try to find allies inside the public institutions. We started actually to work even on the local level, because the main difficulties are on the local level with the local bureaus of this.
Authorities.
Yes, so we had to find allies there, with the local authorities and also the administration there. We worked with the Ministry of Employment. We trained a lot of people from their offices, the employment offices in the region, to support them. But we know that in all cases they will face some difficulties. That's why we worked on the law. It was a little tricky to which one should be achieved before the others. Should we
Yeah.
give them the information and then wait for the law to be changed, or should we wait for the law and then give them information? But we know that changing laws or passing laws, it take times, and actually it took years to go actually to the parliament, uh, and we couldn't wait, so we had to give them the information. We have to start, we have to give to let's say they had to live these difficulties and the challenges. And this actually bring me back to the individual, because at the end of the day, it's their own responsibility, their own willingness to change things. Because even if the process was the easiest one, each
Yeah.
individual will do it on their own. So it was important to give them the knowledge, the skills, to work on the law and the procedures, and then
Hmm.
to bring this together. But at some point, a lot of them, like they felt this frustration because they started and they had this block. But it was part actually of the process, and we learned from it many things that we used actually during the following trainings and session with other groups.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, super excellent. I really like the iterative approach. And as you were talking, I was actually seeing a results framework move, right? You do this activity, but actually the outcome of it is actually that much further down the line. I was
Yeah.
seeing the boxes move in my mind's eye. And it made me think about a few things came up to me. It's assumptions. What are our assumptions when you start? Your assumption is that everyone is interested in the formalization of informal worker. Everyone wants to help out or streamline a process, for example, or simplify a process. So there's like a lot of assumptions that we start with. And so it brings me to the bonus card, and it's something that you may know or not. I worked in peace building for a while, so
Needs,
it's
interest,
what I call
positions.
needs, interests, and positions. You have those stakeholder groups that you have, right?
Yeah.
You have the informal workers themselves. Then you have the different NGOs. Then you have the public institutions, private institutions, and donor. That's just to name a few. I'm sure there are a lot more.
Yeah.
You mentioned ESE, all the private sector associations and groups. So were the needs, because you talked about some of the interests a little bit, the needs you may understand, the need of a, I'm thinking out loud, the public sector could be to have more tax income, for example. If you
Incomes. Yeah.
formalize income, the government will have more. There's also a lot of, you protect the workers as well when they're in the legal system. They have like an insurance, they have social security, all those social safety nets, right? What was the interest of the donor?
Okay, let me start with actually the needs, interest, and the position, because it's like you were there with us, and this is like the ground that we were trying to understand, because people,
Mhm.
the stakeholders had different positions from the very beginning. Like every stakeholder see the other, especially the informal workers and the public sector, they were opponent. And if we kept negotiating on their position, we I think that we couldn't do anything. So it was very important for us to bring them to their interests, to
Yes.
negotiate about interests. And
Uh-huh.
then, and in order to negotiate the interests, we had to understand the needs of everyone. So we have to
Mm.
work with the informal workers themselves to understand their needs, their interests, and then the private sector, and then the public sector, and then the NGOs, and even
Mm.
on the public sector, different or ministries, and each ministry has their own needs and interests, in order to find something in common between all of them. For the donor, actually, I think if I remember very well, it was the because they worked on the informality in other countries. They succeeded on it, and for them, it was an opportunity to work on the formalization in Tunisia, especially after the revolution and after the numbers of informal workers increased. And it was actually linked to the this, let's say, not the security, but the la paix sociale, the social peace.
Social peace,
And
yeah, social
yeah, the
cohesion.
social peace in the region, in Tunisia, and in the region in general, because Tunisia was in the middle of different countries, and they were in borders with Libya, and at that point Libya had their challenges. So it was linked to the social peace and the tackling the informality that can let's say be a challenge for implementing and sustaining democracies in countries.
Okay, I was in that. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's and I'm sure this was one of the projects, and then there are like other projects, more like institutional or policy level,
yeah.
etc. In terms, yeah, that were already funded. We're coming to 30 minutes.
Oh,
Tarek,
already.
we can keep on. I know, you see how time flies.
Yeah,
Um, this very interesting. A lot of things came out of our conversation. A few that I noted, and maybe some lessons learned that people can use is that most of these projects are actually processes, and they're processes that take time. Understanding the stakeholders, understanding the nuances between stakeholders is important.
yeah.
The way that you kept the donor abreast of how you were moving ahead, even though you hadn't achieved the project, the goals of the project or the outcomes. And actually, you did mention this moving away from a projectization of change. So that it's not like a 2-year or 3-year stint, it's actually a much longer process.
Yes,
Engaging, especially in these areas where you have to change perceptions and attitudes so that you can bring about behavioral change. And that
exactly.
individuals, it's the lowest level, and even within groups. So when you do a stakeholder map, you tend to group people, but within that group is not a monolith. Every single
Exactly.
individual, be they institutional, private sector, they all have their own. So that was really interesting, and it's really good to take the time to think about that and to unpack that a little bit. And then you also said that if you want to find common ground, but given the diversity of actors, if you want to find common ground, you have to move away from the positions, even of the opponents, move away from position and kind of move everyone within towards their needs. What do you actually need, and build on the needs rather than what they say they
Yeah.
do, or what they do and what they say they want to do. So anyway, so it was a very, very interesting discussion. Thank you so much for your insights
Thank you,
and your
Ratiba.
time, Farah. I look forward to another conversation with you. They're always very
Thank you. It
insightful.
was a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Bye. Take care.
Bye bye. It was a pleasure. Ciao.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of Rethink Social Change podcast. I hope you got a lot of value and actionable insights from today's show. Would love if you take a minute to leave us a review. And if you work on social change and are up for the challenge, reach out. And before you go, be sure to subscribe so you're the first to know when we release a new episode. Till then, be the change.